Joanne is a longtime educator, currently serving as an educational consultant with the Connecticut State Department of Education, working in the turnaround office. Joanne's portfolio includes providing training and support around the state and the country about issues such as bullying, improving school climate, restorative practices, childhood trauma, cultural competence, and character education. Joanne's full and impressive bio is in the folder at your seat. However, it is her enormous passion and personal commitment to this work that brings her here tonight. We're extremely grateful that she could join us this evening. She's double booked as our keynote speaker on the topic of the importance of creating an adverse-free learning environment. Why does this work matter? So please join me in welcoming Joanne.
Thank you very much. I never get nervous, but I am tonight, so no, really. But I'm very passionate about this, and it is truly an honor to be with you tonight and to share this information with you. So you have some of the slides. You don't have all the slides. I'm more than happy to share because it's quite meaty and content-rich. But I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Vincent Felitti about 3 or 4 years ago when he conducted a conference at Quinnipiac University. And it was a packed house, probably 500 people, standing room only. There were a lot of physicians, there were a lot of clinicians, and he asked if there were educators, and there were 2 of us, me and Superintendent Westbrook, who I asked be included tonight because she is a champion for this work across the state with me. So I thought I'd begin with a definition of resiliency because this is about building resilience in kids. And one of the oldest and most important strength-based models is resilience, where they followed a large cohort of preschoolers into adulthood to see what was it that helped them make it versus those who, along the way, are not successful adults. So resiliency can be defined as the capability to spring back, rebound, successfully adapt in the face of adversity, and develop social and academic competence despite exposure to severe stress or simply the stress of today's world. I've been reading that, sharing that for decades, dates me, and now it's just brought into focus with this critically important work around childhood trauma. So here's the biology. Full disclosure, I am not a physician. I'm a philosopher. Don't hit me with that one, but anyway, the biology of stress, learning how to cope with adversity, is an important part of healthy child development. When we are threatened, our bodies prepare us to respond by increasing our heart rate, blood pressure, and stress hormones such as cortisol. And there's really 3 distinct kinds of stress. We all need stress in our lives, so when we meet that bear, we're ready to fight or flee from the bear. So positive stress is a normal and essential part of healthy development, characterized by brief increases in heart rate and mild elevations in hormone levels. Some situations that might trigger a positive stress response for a child would be the first day with a new caregiver or receiving an injected immunization, those day-to-day events. Some stress we need, whether it's to get through an exam, cross a street, be careful when we're out in the woods, climb a ladder, drive in snow or hard rain. How many of us were doing that for hours yesterday? Cook over a hot stove, walk into a dark room. If we don't have increases in heart rate, we may not make it. So this is an important part. Now, tolerable stress activates the body's alert system to a greater degree as a result of more severe, longer-lasting difficulties, such as the loss of a loved one, a natural disaster, or a frightening injury. If the activation is time-limited and buffered by relationships with adults who help the child adapt, the brain and other organs recover from what might otherwise be damaging effects. And we can think about horrible trauma, whether it's children who are dealing with immigration issues or deportation issues now. We can also think about the horror at Sandy Hook, where not the children who so tragically died, but those around them, siblings, classmates, community members, they will make it. They will be okay if they have the right support. And that's about us. It's about us and providing, sure, some of them may need some therapy, they may need some extra help, but they will be okay and be successful adults if they have the right supports. So who has stress? Everybody. We do in our day-to-day, but so do children. And sometimes what seems not so big to us is huge to them. You know the commercial about the little one who leaves her, I think it's a stuffed animal turtle on some vacation, and the FedEx truck comes back to deliver it. That's big for kids. And ACEs, which we'll talk about in a little bit, whether immigration concerns, and there's a whole lot of school and community-related issues. How kids are treated. And we're talking about physical treatment as well as emotional treatment in the day-to-day, in our classrooms, our schools, our hallways, as well as our community settings before school and after school programs. This is big, and we can make a difference. So, toxic stress. The future of any society depends on the ability to foster the healthy development of the next generation. Extensive research on the biology of stress now shows that healthy development can be derailed by excessive or prolonged activation of stress response systems in the body and brain. Such toxic stress, this is the definition of toxic stress, can have damaging effects on learning, behavior, and health across the lifespan. So a toxic stress response can occur when a child experiences strong, frequent, and/or prolonged adversity, such as physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, exposure to violence, and/or the accumulated burdens of family economic hardship without adequate adult support. This kind of prolonged activation of the stress response systems can disrupt the development of brain architecture and other organ systems and increase the risk for stress-related disease and cognitive impairment well into the adult years. And that's what Nadine Burke-Harris is talking about. What happens to you as a child impacts your health and well-being as an adult. So toxic stress equals trauma. And those with trauma have exaggerated fear responses. It damages developing brains. It actually damages neurons. And this should put to rest that notion that circumstances of disadvantage doom children into bad life outcomes. This is not about zip code. It's not about color. It's not about religion. It's about the amount of adversity, because adversity exists in all zip codes, and so do caring adults and safe relationships. And we can't lose sight of that. So when a child's life moves fluidly between normalcy and safety, laughing, playing, joking, sharing, all of those kinds of things being included, to being scared and unsafe, and whether that's community violence, friends incarcerated, adults fighting, mental illness or drugs in your world, it doesn't even have to be that severe, being yelled at just constantly, demeaned, the child develops an overactive stress response. It affects the body. And as Nadine Burke-Harris says, it literally gets under your skin. It may present as ADHD, but it's actually trauma. And I will tell you, as I sit in the turnaround office and hear statistics thrown around, last year in the state of Connecticut, 12.8% of children were labeled special education. This year, it's 14.8. And I believe to my core, without any data, but I think it will be proven, is that our statistics would be well below 10% if we had a trauma bucket. So adverse childhood experiences, and that's what is referred to as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are potentially traumatic events that have negative lasting effects on health and well-being. These experiences range from physical, emotional, or sexual abuse to parental divorce or the incarceration of a parent or guardian. A growing body of research has sought to quantify the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences and illuminate their connection with negative behavioral and health outcomes such as obesity, alcoholism, depression later in life. So here's the history. You heard Dr. Harris talking about Bob Anda and Vince Felitti. Well, in the 80s, Bob Anda is at the CDC, And his area of research is the emotional underpinnings of disease. So what he's studying is what happens when you're diagnosed with a pretty chronic or debilitating illness, whether that's cancer or MS or Crohn's disease or something that you're going to have to deal with in a very important way. And if your attitude is, this is over, I can't deal with this, and you go into a depression, you will not do as well as somebody who says, I can beat this, I'm ready for that fight. That's why they will treat the underlying depression before they will treat the illness very often. So he's studying that at the same time that Vince Felitti is running prevention medicine at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. And in part of his role as head of prevention medicine, he's running an obesity clinic. And at that particular time, there were 286 patients. And just like happens when any one of us goes to the doctor says, hello, how are you? How's the family? What's going on at work? He's talking to them. And of these 286 cases of morbid obesity, not like me, you could probably lose easily 25, 30 pounds. We're talking about 4, 5, 6, 700 pounds. And most of these cases were women. And as he's finding out just in normal conversation, over half of them were sexually abused. And he also noted that after successful weight loss, they were gaining this weight back a year after treatment. And he wanted to know why. And he hypothesized that these women, and some of them told them that intentionally they were doing this, some of them were doing it unintentionally, but they were gaining a huge amount of weight so that nobody would touch them again. This is also true, we now know, of many substance abusers as we look at the opioid epidemic, that people are trying to self-medicate to dull the pain that they're experiencing or they have experienced in their lives. So he wanted to know why this was happening, and the two of them paired together to try to confirm their discovered findings. So what they did, as Dr. Harris says, they identified 17,500 middle-class adults, you and me. We're not talking about a special impoverished population. 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated, well-off economically, and so on. And they asked a huge battery of questions about health, as well as difficult questions about childhood. And here's what they found out. 28% of that population had experienced physical abuse. 27% had abused substances. 13% had a mother who was physically abused, and 1 in 5, a full 20% of that entire population were sexually abused. The higher the count of ACEs, so too was the percentage of smokers, injection drug abusers, alcoholics, teenage pregnancy, STDs, obesity, liver cancer, strokes, being raped as adult, having financial problems, diabetes, suicide attempts, bronchitis, emphysema, asthma, all increased. So who we are, you, me, our neighbors, our family members, we are the sum of everything we have lived, good and bad. The brain is adapted to that environment. So if you know your ACE score, your risk factors, then you have the ability to do something about them. So here are the 10 ACEs, and I'm not going to linger on this because you're going to have a handout with all of that in it, but these are the 10 things that impact in childhood your adult life. So there are some additional factors, and this comes from the Center for Youth Wellness, and I, again, won't linger on this because this is in Appendix 2 of the book that you were so graciously given, which is an awesome, awesome book. So these are other things, and I have yet to find out, I'm very eager to find out from the Center for Youth Wellness how these things impact that score, but I haven't had a chance to contact them. So this is now called the science of adversity. Now the mind doesn't remember, but the body does. Trauma affects a child's developing brain, and the body cannot separate from the mind. So we've got to get past, there's a mental health issue, there's a behavioral issue, there's an academic issue. We're a whole person, as are our children, and it's all mixed up together. And these kinds of adversities have negative impact on behavior, on learning, on DNA. There's neuron damage. It's on physical well-being and mental well-being. And I'll tell you a little true story. A couple months ago, work a lot with foster and adoptive parents. And I was with a group in, I think it was Danbury. And there was a mom who was just ready to sign the adoption papers of a little one who was about 18 months old, little girl. And she said she received her from DCF, when the Department of Children and Families, when the little girl was 4 weeks old. She came to her with 4 broken bones, mom who was drug infested and had serious mental illness, father was completely out of the picture, and the story goes on and on and on. So now she's in a wonderful home at 1.5 years and will have no cognitive memory of those early weeks of her childhood, but her body has already been impacted. And that's what's going on here. So, ACEs are a stronger predictor of health and behavioral issues than anything else. ACEs are very real, but historically, no one wants to know about them, much less talk about them. And I will never forget Dr. Felitti addressing that entire packed house of people saying the only reason we're not doing this is because it's social taboo. So I am trying to shout this from the rafters and say we got to get over this, because it's too important to our children and to us. So the old approach is just to say, push it to the side, pretend it's not happening. You're here in the school, you're here in the community. You can forget that and just move on and be like somebody who's living in the land of joy. So assessing ACEs in school currently is taboo. And as I travel the state and work with district after district and share what we're going to share with you in just a second, I know that informal screening of ACEs of children in schools are happening. I know in Waterbury, I think it's happening in some schools in Bridgeport, that they're taking all the kids and doing an informal score, and that helps inform class lists. Because if you've got a class full of kids with an awful lot of adversity, it's going to be a very different class than if you have a class with kids with none. So this is a very real thing. I'm hopeful that Connecticut will take this on at some point, and that real ACE screening will be done at full well-child visits, and that when schools and other organizations receive immunization records, health forms, and so on, they'll also get an ACE score. But right now, that's not happening. So I'm waking up in the middle of the night as I'm putting this together last year, and I go, oh my goodness, here's a paradox. Educators are what we call mandated reporters. And we are mandated reporters when we suspect children to be at risk for physical, emotional, sexual abuse, or neglect. But if we screened for ACEs and we knew that, we would confirm our suspicions for physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and neglect. So adults with high ACE scores are impacting our kids, and we have to dare to ask every one of us about ACEs, because those underlying problems, incarceration, substance abuse, violence, and so on, impact kids because they're untreated. Kids are growing up in those environments, and the cycle continues. We have to break this cycle. It is the largest untreated public health crisis facing this country today. So if you have a score of 3 out of 10, you're twice as likely to have heart disease. You, me. If you have a score of 4 out of 10, you're 3 times more likely to become depressed. A score of 6 out of 10, and your life expectancy is 20 years less than somebody without childhood adversity. And at a score of 4 out of 10, mental and physical health impacts are clearly evident, and this is the precipice for a high ACE score. 5 is definitely a high ACE score. 4 is considered right there on the cusp. So here's what we're going to do. And if you'd open your folder, and I think it's on the right side, I think, but you'll find it. You have 2 pieces of paper. And the first one says, what is my ACE score? And I know this is a little risky, and we don't want people to have to self-disclose, so we're going to do it safely. And if you really don't feel comfortable doing this, I don't want to trigger anybody. But I would like you to look at, did you find it? Is on the other side? Which side is it on? right side. The first one, what is my A score? I think you have a little chartreuse sticky. And it's double-sided, and let me be real clear before you start to score yourself. The timeline is birth to your 18th birthday. And if you were in a family that had 3 different divorces, that only counts 1 point, okay? Well, you don't have to count it like 3 times. So you can get a score as low as 0, and the highest thing is 10. And just do the chartreuse one. This is about your score. And my wonderful colleagues have little bags so that we're not going to self-disclose. And if you would just kind of let us know with a hand, and they'll collect all these little chartreuse stickies as you go forward. I'll give you a second so I'm not talking over you. It's double-sided again, 0 to 10. Try to be as honest as you can. All we need is the sticky with a number on it. That's it. You keep the white sheet. We just need the sticky with a number. Just kind of let us know when you're ready, and they'll circulate. We've got a whole bunch of bags going around. We just don't want anybody to have to self-disclose. As you're doing this, I think I've done this now probably 3 dozen times. And do it the same way we're doing it here tonight. It's a very powerful way of understanding what this is about. Just the chartreuse one. Don't handle the pink one yet. Okay, well, these are... Okay, so I'm just going to keep talking for time's sake here as you're scoring yourself. Just hold it up and we'll collect them all. We're not going to start posting till everybody's is in the bag, in one bag or another. But in that original Kaiser Permanente population, a third of that 17,500 had a 0. Quarter had 1, 16% had 2, 10% 3, and 16% of that original population had 4 or more. At another conference, and these doctors are out there doing the same thing we're doing right now, at another conference, just to give you an example, a quarter had 0, 16% had 1, 13% 2, 13% 3, and a full third of that group in Ohio had 4 or more. Now, the highest A scores they've ever tabulated in this way, kind of interesting, were at the annual meeting of the National Association of Psychiatrists. It just tells you. So anyway, we're going to start posting these things. Are there any more outstanding ones that are going to go in a bag before? All right, so we're going to post these. Now, here's what I'd like you to do with that second one. And I've changed the wording just enough to help you sort of look at the lens of it through a child. So here's what I want you to do. Think of a child who has severe behavior issues. Could be a child that you dealt with 10 years ago. It could be somebody in your world today. But now, just from what you know, score that child according to the same scale. And again, with those stickies, it's not about self-disclosure, but we don't want to stampede. So just hold it up and we'll post those too. But now, child with severe behavior issues. Because we're going to have a contrast up here between the chartreuse ones and the pink ones. Severe behavior issues. Just hold it up, and we'll start to, as soon as somebody has an empty bag, we'll start to get those up. All right, hold it up. Oh, here we go. They're coming. Usually when I do this and there's enough room to move around, I just have people post that one themselves, but this is going to be, okay, Carrie's going to, you going to collect some? Carrie's going to help. So just hold them up and we'll start adding it to it. Okay, as we do this, we're getting some pink up now. And anybody is welcome. Everywhere I go, I take a picture of the number line, and you're welcome to take a picture of it too when we're all done. But okay, so we're starting to get some pink ones, and I'm just going to keep going, and we'll look at this as we go forward. All right. But here we go. Hold them up. I don't want to get to the punchline before we. Here they come. If you notice, our scores are skewed to the left, although even among us, right, we have scores 4 and more. We have 4s, 5s, we have an 8, we have a 9, just among us right here. And I'm not surprised. I usually work exclusively with educators and some community-based folks, but today it's been mostly educators. I'm not surprised that we skew to the left. There's one over there. That because our buckets are pretty full and we can give to others. But what we're going to start looking at the difference as these continue to go up. Do we have a few more coming? Yes, yes. Oh, good. All right, here they come all over. Just hold them higher so we can see. We just want a nice contrast. Again, it's the same everywhere I go. All right, so here is the big punchline for what you're going to see, because notice we do have some that are skewed to the left, but most of them are 4 or more. And a show of hands, how many of you could have scored higher if you knew more information? Raise your hand. Now look around the room. So what may be a 3 could be a 5 or a 6 or something else, but look at the contrast. So here's the punchline. At a score of 4 or more, it changes the brain in significant ways, and a child with a 4 or more is 32, almost 33 times more likely to have learning and behavior issues in school. Acting out, calling out, running out, hitting somebody, can't pay attention, impulse control problems, difficulty regulating behavior. I don't know if you know this, but the worst day of the week in schools for misbehavior and office referrals is Friday, followed only a little bit by Monday. Now we know why. Because these children have to cycle from the relative calm and predictability and safety of school to their chaotic homes and communities and then come back. Look, pretty much in your face. Kids with behavior issues have trauma. So, children who grow up in homes and communities where ACEs are routine experience toxic stress as their normal. And without knowledge and intervention, they have nothing else to replace it with, and it becomes normalized. How can a child learn how to deal with conflict when your parents are yelling and fighting with one another routinely? How can a child learn how to focus when you live in a neighborhood where gunshots and sirens go off regularly? How can a child learn how to control impulses when you never know when your father or brother or uncle is going to come home in a drunken rage? How can you learn to delay gratification when everyone around you is doing drugs? And how can you plan for the future when it's hard to get through just one single day? So, children cannot articulate what the root of the problem is. They have no skills for doing that. They do not understand the impact of adversity in their normal world. They turn into adults with stress, so we have to be where the kids are. Many children who develop emotional and behavioral problems do not begin to show it until it gets a little bit rigorous around the 4th grade, but guess what? This is growing exponentially by the day, and we're seeing preschool children, kindergarten children who are bouncing off walls and ruining classrooms and having tantrums that are unparalleled. So typically and all too frequently, we just say, suck it up. Pretend, that's not happening in your life. You're here to learn. And we never treat a cancer victim that way. If we have a child with leukemia, neuroblastoma, and they're still coming to school, they can barely walk because they can't keep anything down, they have no hair, and they're just trying to get through each day, we would never say, run the mile. Sit there, you haven't finished your food yet. We would never do that. And nobody can leave their stresses at the door. We have to understand the impact of this. And if the stress response is extreme and long-lasting, and buffering relationships with adults are unavailable to the child, the result can be damaged, weakened systems, and brain architecture with lifelong repercussions. So when a child's stress response systems are activated within an environment of supportive relationships with adults, these physiological effects are buffered and brought back down to baseline. The result is the development of healthy stress response systems. So here's where I come out. We have got to stop punishing children in homes and communities. I'm not saying we're not holding them accountable, but when we punish children, we increase their stress, we diminish the very relationships they need. It doesn't do anything to teach them more productive skills, and labels the very children who need caring adults in a safe environment. It normalizes and confirms a life of toxic stress. It also confirms that adults don't care about them. It doesn't do anything to get to the root of the problem and just perpetuates the cycle of adversity. So we see the behavior, and we're not getting to the root of the behavior. If that bear is coming at you all day long, brains with trauma have exaggerated fear response, and it's manifested in inappropriate behavior. So if I'm sitting near somebody and somebody calls my name, and just by chance I brush against somebody with toxic stress, guess what? What are they going to do? Hit me. And all of a sudden I say, okay, you hit, you know the rules, you're out of here. But that's not why she hit. She's just reacting. So we have to understand what this is doing in the day-to-day. So whether a peer next to them kicks them, adult reprimands a child in a way that's uncomfortable for them, when somebody unexpectedly touches them or calls them a name, these symptoms are masked, but you're not getting to the root cause. And it's similar to having a really bad cough. You go to the doctor, they give you a prescription, and your cough may get a little bit better, but it does nothing to deal with the underlying root cause of lung cancer or tuberculosis or something else. So which children should we worry about? Well, we definitely should worry about kids who are misbehaving, but we should also worry about kids who are quiet, because many of them do not want to be re-traumatized. So they just are really quiet. They do everything that they can possibly do. And then there's those who become cheerleaders and presidents of classes and so on, as if to show the world, I don't have to parade what's going on in my life. So we really should worry about all kids. And ACEs doesn't discriminate, as we said earlier. So here's my mantra now. No bears in school, in programs, anywheres. We have to create what I call our bear-free, adverse-free environments. Everywhere has to be safe for children, because we've got to provide respite and predictability and safety. So every classroom, hallway, cafeteria, playground, parking lot, bus stop, and so on has to be physically, emotionally, culturally, intellectually safe, predictable and consistent, no surprises. Those routines need to be understood. And the grandmaster of understanding what this work was all about was Fred Rogers. He got it. He began every episode the same way so that children could come into an environment which was safe and predictable, and he could discuss incredible, difficult issues with them. So, do I have time to play it? Okay. I usually save this little clip for when I do restorative practice training. That's all I do. I don't see my office, probably a good thing, but I'm just out there working with as many adults who will listen. And so I share this because it's very moving, and I think it describes in about 2.5 minutes what we're talking about. So.
Fred came to me and said, I have this idea. You could be a police officer. That kind of stopped me in my tracks. I grew up in the ghetto, and I did not have a positive opinion of police officers. Policemen were sicking dogs and water hoses on people. And I really had a hard time putting myself in that role. So I was not excited about being Officer Clemens at all. But there was one particular scene that Fred and I did where he had his feet resting in this plastic pool on a hot day.
Oh, there's Officer Clemens. Hi, Officer Clemens. Come in.
Rogers, how are you?
And he invited me to come over and to rest my feet in the water with him.
Would you like to join me?
Okay.
Sure.
The icon Fred Rogers not only was showing my brown skin in the tub with his white skin as two friends, but as I was getting out of that tub, he was helping me dry my feet.
There, that one's dry. Thank you.
And so that scene touched me in a way that I was not prepared.
Sometimes just a minute like this will really make a difference.
I think he was making a very strong statement. That was his way. I still was not convinced that Officer Clemens could have a positive influence in the neighborhood and in the real world neighborhood, but I think I was proven wrong.
You were on Mr. Rogers' neighborhood for a long time.
Yeah, I discovered a friend for life. I'll never forget one day I was watching him film a session, and you know how at the end of the program, he takes his sneakers off, he hangs up his sweater, and he says, "You make every day a special day just by being you, and I like you just the way you are." I was looking at him when he was saying that, and he walks over to where I was standing, and I said, "Fred, were you talking to me?" And he said, "Yes, I have been talking to you for years, but you heard me today." It was like telling me I'm okay as a human being. That was one of the most meaningful experiences I'd ever had.
I'm so proud of you, Francois.
Oh, thank you, Fred.
Do you have time to give a song to my friend and me?
I sure do. There are many ways to say I love you. There are many ways to say I care about you. Many ways, many ways, many ways to say I love you.
I just love that piece. So that's, I think, the gold standard. So children with toxic stress need adults who understand them and their issues. And this is adult work. This is absolutely adult work. We need to understand the science of toxic stress, be intimately knowledgeable about ACEs. And this is a book that you will enjoy reading. It's awesome. We cannot just tell children to do better. The entire family should be involved, but we don't have that access right now in all too many cases. But we need to do what we can in our own settings to provide respite from their chaotic, traumatic lives. Moving from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, because there's always a reason for why we do what we do, including acting out and misbehaving in schools. And we all have to get over it. Children are not making choices. They are acting. They're reacting. This isn't about a choice. And decades ago, we knew nothing about secondhand smoke. In fact, if we were gathered here together 20, 25 years ago, there would have been an ashtray on every single table. But if you look around, it's very hard to find a no smoking sign these days because walls have been repainted and the culture has changed. That's where we need to go. So where are the adversities? Everywhere. None of us are alone. So here's what I think we are contributing in Connecticut. In San Francisco, you heard Dr. Harris say that they're informing schools for children with high ACE scores. That's not happening right now, but what we need to do is the top intervention for children with stress is that, oh, let me go on, I'll go back. This is the number one intervention: reduce the dose of adversity. That's it. And right there with it is build high quality, trusting relationships with kids. That will help them more than anything else. Less is more with respect to curriculum, to literacy and numeracy and so on. And then, of course, there's a whole multi-tiered system of supports for these children, but we can create Mr. Rogers classrooms, programs, and so on. Calm, no yelling, understanding that we say, what's going on? We don't say, why did you hit him? And so on and so forth. So let me just go back for 1 second. I think that this is a really good measure of how we're doing, is that any time we interact with a child, for any reason at all, that interaction should improve the relationship. And if it doesn't, we got more work to do. We have to go back at it. So we got to get beyond this sort of no excuses policy around academic achievement. I don't care what you've been through. You can learn anyway. We have to deal with it. And we have to help them be able to name the adversity and create safe environments. And that's what I've been doing my entire professional life. And for me, this work here creates the urgency. It's a practical urgency. It's also a moral imperative that we create safe environments for kids. So more than anything else, they need at least one stable adult in their lives. And that is something that I hope it's not just one. We're an army, a movement of caring adults. And these matter for every child, but especially those with toxic stress. So scientific research points to the presence of a stable, caring adult in a child's life as the key to building skills of resilience. So here we are back at resiliency. But very importantly, resilience is not something you're born with. It gets built over time. And we have to, these are the 9 resiliency factors. And I believe you have the next few slides in there because these are some of the sort of solution paths. All 9 are important, but when they looked at that original cohort into adulthood, 70%, not 17, but 70% of them said that the reason they made it through their own challenges and adversities was that they had somebody who was there for them. So the solutions, working restoratively. And this is versus punitively. And we can all do that. But adults don't know what they don't know. It's about filling our own toolboxes so that we can work in a different way with young people. So restoratively is building high quality communities and relationships and then repairing those relationships and community when harm has been done. Another really important strength-based model is school connectedness. Kids should feel close. They should have friends, but they need that adult. They should be happy to go to school or to an after-school program or whatever the setting is. They need to feel a sense of belonging, that they are part of that community, not alienated from that community, and that adults in school treat students fairly. And when you dig right down to fairness, we're talking about equity, not equality, making sure everybody gets what they need. But at the core of what it means to be fair is having a voice, being heard. And that's one of the hallmarks of working restoratively. And finally, feeling safe. So I'm going to end with these few graphs. They come out of the original, couple decades old research around school connectedness, but they apply exactly the same when you layer on adversity. Because kids who are highly connected to school, according to those 5 measures, so it's good to be below the line on these, neutral, median level connectedness, suicide or attempts at suicide and emotional distress are not nearly as prevalent for kids who are highly connected to school. Same thing is true for risky sexual behaviors. And then look at substance abuse. Kids who are high on life don't need to resort to substance abuse to feel better. And then look at violent or deviant behavior. Kids who are highly connected to school are not as likely as their peers who are disconnected to engage in violent or deviant behavior. And I have a couple slides that just talk about some success stories. Let me just say there are selected schools throughout the country who are really taking this on. And there's one state that I know of, Washington State, that took it on as an entire state and dealt with treatment programs rather than arrests and so on and so forth, saving themselves $10.4 billion over 10 years. We can tackle this. Why not us? Why not Connecticut? So, and I'll tell you, end with, I have a dream. And my dream is that someday we ask a child, do you have a caring adult you can go to at school? Because that's a really important question. And that child sort of looks at you cross-eyed and said, I don't know what you're talking about. I can go to anybody. That's my dream.